Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and the kind of things that I believe Creative Assembly should do before they complete the game, before they end support for it, which is seemingly the decision they've decided to go for. They still have a team working on DLC, they still have people working on updates, but their main efforts at the moment, based on as far as I can tell, is working on a next Total War game. Do I agree with that decision? Not strictly so. But clearly, they've decided after Hyenas, Pharaoh, etc., to go down the path. We're devoting the vast majority of our resources towards the next Total War games as opposed to really improving Warhammer 3. Again, not something I necessarily agree with, but I'm just saying as it is. So I'm sure a lot of people are just going to ignore that aspect and just say, it's like, well, don't you want CA to continuously support Warhammer 3? What I want does not really matter in this picture. Anyway, here are some of the things to talk about. A lot of people, if you were to ask them on Reddit or on social media, they would talk about things like, just to move the map very quickly, they would talk about Ind, they would talk about Koresh, they would talk about different races, different legendary lords, different characters. That would be great, I'm not gonna lie, but it's worth pointing out a couple of things about Warhammer 3. One, I think it's more important to fix core game mechanics than just adding more stuff. Like, a lot of mods add units, characters, etc., but they don't fix core mechanics, and that's one of the issues I do have with certain mods. And two, Warhammer 3 is already the most populated Total War game, or the most populated Warhammer game in terms of number of races, number of characters. I don't think there's any other game that has ever been released in the Warhammer universe that has the same level of breadth into it, like just the sheer scale of how many races, how many characters are in the game. So, just worth pointing out, that's probably what a lot of people would answer, though. From my perspective, it would be nice, it would be cool, but I'd rather them focus on other things. So one of the things that I believe they should improve on, should focus on, is that every race should get a balance update so that their pacing in a campaign works. You don't want a situation like, oh, some races start off very strong and dominate the campaign map in 10 turns, other races take 30 turns to end up dominating the campaign map. Because that means when you're looking to replace certain campaigns, that some are worse than others. Now, to be clear, you do want an end game, but you also want that good pacing. For instance, for Cast Dwarves, this is one of the problems. You can get access to a lot of units fairly quickly by abusing a lot of game mechanics, but naturally speaking, the way the Cast Dwarves are designed does require them to build up. And the problem is not just that the early game is limited and lacks variety, it's also the problem that once you do get to that variety, you're steamrolling the map. So both those situations are not great. So it's a question of balancing, it's a question of pacing. That's the first thing that I believe Creative Assembly should address. And it seems that they're moving in that direction, but I still think work needs to be done. And for the record, that doesn't mean all races should be the same. Just because races can have the same pacing does not mean they have the same mechanics. Khorne will always be Khorne, Cast Dwarves will always be Cast Dwarves, Greenskins will always be Greenskins. They play very differently. And just for the record, you know, you look at races that can dominate the campaign fairly quickly. You look at Khorne, you look at Dark Elves, you look at Greenskins. Those races do not play the same in any way, shape, or form, really. So that's something worth pointing out. Second thing to talk about, sieges. And we can talk about garrisons, we can talk about how the siege battles work, we can talk about siege dynamics. If Creative Assembly thinks we just want to sit on our ass and wait multiple turns to attack a settlement, as opposed to just taking it over, that's not really how it's going to work. And even if they remove siege attacker from most units, you're still going to have artillery, you're still going to have certain units. That's going to create racial imbalance issues. So I do believe that they need to improve sieges in a very significant way, because sieges just don't work very well right now in the game. And I can tell you this as a content creator. I find it a drag to play for them because they're not challenging battles, they're not offering compelling gameplay, and I also can tell you what other content creators have realized is if you're streaming or posting siege battles in a video, people flat out don't watch them. That's a problem. That's a problem. That just indicates how people find the actual gameplay that we're dealing with in sieges not compelling at all to watch or even to play. So that's a problem. Like, you can also add in the issue of auto-resolve or how we could build siege equipment, the maps, the pathfinding, AI, lots of things. I do think there were improvements in the proving grounds, but I also think that there were also design philosophies that didn't necessarily fit in how a Warhammer or a Total War campaign should work. Third thing to talk about is battles themselves, field battles. And specifically what I mean here is fighting multiple armies fighting each other. When you have one army fighting another army, that's the best gameplay that you have in Total War. Like a field battle, one side against another. Where it breaks down very quickly is when you have multiple armies on each side engaging one another. Sure, you can use things like lightning strike, control large armies to avoid that, but be it due to sieges and garrisons of sieges with an army, with an AI faction's army defending a settlement, or let's say 4 armies meeting 4 armies on the field of battle, that kind of gameplay doesn't work because of the way because of the interactions on both the campaign map and the battlefield. It doesn't lend itself to great gameplay, and look, from my perspective, I think big, massive battles with dozens of units on each side are freaking awesome. But Total War is still stuck in this idea where they are designing gameplay where it's one army against another, but that's not the campaign gameplay that we're dealing with. We do find multiple armies. Maybe we bring our own multiple armies or we get lightning strike, but regardless of how we decide to deal with that, we still have that problem of how armies interact with each other, control, limits on units. Surprisingly, the engine can actually support a lot of units in battles. Like I've seen battles like over 200 units, like 164 AI factions, 40 for myself, right? Because one faction can only bring 2 armies, and then you have that annoyance of you're gonna get reinforcements, they're gonna get reinforcements because you can't bring your entire force on the battlefield. UI issues you can add in that respect. So yes, I do think that large-scale battles in general and the interactions of those large-scale battles need to be improved. Maybe an idea is just allow unlimited units in a battle from the very beginning, maybe on a level. But another problem is what happens when you fight another army and you're outnumbered 2-1, 3-1, 4-1. You're going to encounter those situations. Well, corner camping, abusing flanks, abusing certain tactics, it doesn't lend itself well towards very compelling gameplay. So there's a ton of issues on that, but fundamentally speaking, they really need to improve that dynamic of larger scale battles in the game and how both you as a player and AI handles them. I'm sure there's all kinds of ways of dealing with that. Absolutely. Beyond that, we can also talk about the lack of an endgame, because Warhammer 3 doesn't really have an endgame. Yes, you have endgame crisis, but endgame crisis just really suck. And they're not a compelling endgame because you can put them to spawn very quickly, very early on in a campaign. But again, you can maneuver around that. Endgame crises don't work for a simple reason that the factions that spawn from endgame crisis haven't really built up that power naturally. It's one thing to defeat a powerful faction that controls a third of the map, like say Grimgor takes control of the Mountains of Morn. That is a genuinely bigger threat, far bigger threat than all the endgame armies, even Ultimate Game Crisis, in any campaign, as any race, as any character, regardless of when you spawn it, because Grimgor would have earned that power, and that actually makes him dangerous. He has higher level lords, he has heroes, he has structures to build units, so it's not just a question like, oh, you have a couple of powerful AI armies to defeat and that's it. No, you have sustainability for the AI. So the difficulty curve of Total War goes down. So it's an inverted difficulty curve. It's hardest at the beginning, far easier later on, and it's later on when you get a lot of the cool units, cool heroes, legendary lord confederations, all that. That should be the best part of a campaign. But it's the worst part of a campaign as things currently stand right now. Something that could be related to this is objectives. I think like the dwarf rework really added to that with the legendary grudges, the Age of Reckoning objectives, all those kind of things. Those really added to replayability of dwarves, but there needs to be more, and those kind of things need to be more widespread. An objective system in a campaign for longer objectives would be much better. The victory conditions do not fulfill that purpose. They do not feel compelling, they do not feel interesting to really deal with in the vast majority of campaigns. Either it's something you're going out of your way to do for very little benefit, or you just do them without even realizing you're doing them. That's not how objectives should work in a campaign. And I think like there are certain mods that do it better, like the Chaos Invasion mod I talked about a couple of days, what that mod essentially does is it makes Archeon a massive endgame threat. But he's not a massive endgame threat just because he gets a lot of free armies. No, he's a massive endgame threat because he gets a lot of faction potential, he can upgrade Warriors of Chaos units, and then he vassalizes and all of Norsca and confederates all the other Warriors of Chaos. But he still has to build those armies up in his campaign. He still has to go out there and conquer stuff, and you can counter it. It feels so much better to deal with a faction buffed up like that than any kind of endgame crisis in a campaign. And it gives you that sense that you're dealing with a foe, you're dealing with a threat in a campaign that is actually worth engaging with in a lot of different ways. So those would be some of the things like endgame situation, all that balancing, sieges, armies, massive armies interacting with one another in a way that doesn't feel frustrating or grindy. It's like, oh, I killed a bunch of armies, here's another bunch of armies that are not a threat necessarily themselves. Those are the kind of things I would like to see. As far as, ideal scenario, I would like a story mode, an actual good story mode, like cutscenes, dialogue, choices, all those kind of things would be awesome. I think this is the part of Total War where CA has really cheapened out over the years. Really, for all of their history, they've been really cheap in terms of story content, voice acting, etc. I really think they should invest in that a lot more, because I think it would pay off. Sure, there's the question of replayability in a sandbox and all that, but you could just have a toggle at the beginning of a campaign, or we could choose not to engage in it. I mean, I always think like whenever CA has tried to do story-focused content, it generally hasn't worked because of pacing issues, balancing issues, and all that. But I do think it's worthwhile for them to do so. A compelling story, compelling narrative decisions would be great. But that's, as I said, a luxury item. Realistically, I wouldn't expect them to do so, but it would be nice, at least for certain races, new DLC characters, like the Gash, Tankwall in particular, to have that. That's all I had to say. Christine signing out. Let me know what you guys think, what you guys would like to see, what would you guys consider to be a completed state for Warhammer 3. Stay tuned for more.